Hello, everyone, and welcome to Empower 2021. I hope you're all having an awesome day so far, and I cannot wait to get started on this session. Now, I want everybody to stay calm, fasten your seatbelts, and hold on tight to your pants because in this session, we are going from 0 to 60 on planning and implementing an app in Quickbase. So, my name is Nashmia Burney, and I am a senior solutions consultant here at Quickbase. I help organizations unlock the true potential of streamlining their unique business processes by enabling them to quickly deploy custom business applications and solutions on the Quickbase platform. And I've been with the company now for about 3 years. So, yes, right, this is my third Empower. And man, I got to tell you, every year it just gets better and more exciting. And I am so thrilled to get started with our session today. Before we get started, we are going to be taking questions throughout, so feel free to add them to our Q&A. All right, so we got a lot to cover. I'm going to dive right in. So we're going to first talk about Quickbase's realms anatomy. So what is a realm? Why do you need a realm? And what goes on underneath that realm? How is it connected to accounts, applications, and so on? Next, we're going to talk about some core Quickbase concepts. So things like apps, applications, tables, relationships, fields, roles and permissions. We're going to cover all of that. Then we're going to talk about some use case discovery. And there's some things to cover in there, so I'm going to leave it at that. Then we're going to do some data modeling from our core concepts that we learned, the use case discovery, scenario, and questions that we learned. And then we're going to take that data model and implement it into a Quickbase application. So let's get started. All right, so starting from Quickbase's realms anatomy. Now, what is a realm? A realm is a logically segregated subdomain associated to an account. So imagine you're company A, and company A can have multiple realms. The realm account structure lets you group multiple accounts together. So one company can have multiple realms, and each realm can contain multiple accounts. Now, one thing I want you to note here is typically we do see one realm within a company, but where would you want separate realms? Well, if you wanted to create your own domain, for example, over here on the screen, you could see if company A wanted companyaa.quickbase.com and another realm with a different subdomain called companyaeu.quickbase.com, that's where you might need another realm. And then realm administrators can control users across many different applications and accounts. And realms enable you to create your own custom URL, like I mentioned before, and provide you with centralized control over all of these applications. So within a realm are multiple accounts. Now, typically we do see one account associated with a realm, but within a realm, you can have multiple accounts, but it's not the other way around. So I want you to note that. One realm can have multiple accounts, but one account has only one realm. It's not the other way around. Next, within accounts, you will find applications, which consist of tables, relationships, make up your entire data structure, your workflow, everything lives within those apps. And within applications are tables, which house and store your data. And within tables are fields. So tables consist of fields, which hold your data on forms, reports, charts within your Quickbase applications. All right, so now that we know what a realm is, we can move on to some core Quickbase concepts. Great. So in some core Quickbase concepts, I'm going to talk about what are applications and when do you need to create a new app versus what's a table, what's a relationship, and when would you create a new table as opposed to a new app. Same thing with fields. What are fields? When would you create a field versus a table? And what are roles and permissions? And when would you create those? Great. So let's talk about applications. So your apps consist of tables, relationships between those tables, dashboards, your workflow, your entire data structure lives within your application. So where would you want to create a new app? There's a couple of scenarios. First, You might want to create a new app when there's a completely new use case with no shared set of data or users. So an example of that might be you wouldn't want to create your calorie count table in a project management or a finance budgeting app, right? It's a completely different use case. It's something more personal, and you want to keep your project management separate than that. So you might create a new app to track your calorie count, calorie deficits, and so on. Next thing is archiving data into a new app. So think of a scenario where you have a project management application and you've been tracking different projects for the past 30 years. And you might want to archive data that's older than 10 years into another application. So that's when you would create an archiving data app connected to your project management app and house all the data that's older than 10 years in there. So that's a new archiving data into a new use case, into a new app. Next, expanding a workflow into new app focused on separate set of users. So an example of that would be where, let's take project management again. Within your project management use case, you might have requesters who actually send you a request for your projects before a project is approved and initiated and then tracked for the end-to-end process. So you might want to keep your project requests in a completely separate app and then have those requests populate into your project management app where you can track the end-to-end process of the projects. So again, applications, they consist of your tables, relationships, your dashboards, your entire data structure. And when you might want to create a new app is when you have a new use case with no shared set of data or users, when you want to archive data into a new app and expand a workflow into a new app focused on a separate set of users. Next, we have tables and relationships. So this is quite popular, right? And most of you might already know this, but for those of you who don't, tables consist of forms, reports, and charts. They can be connected to each other through what we like to call relationships. And they consist of records, which store your data, fields, which are data elements, and even notifications that you can create at a table level. So when would you want to create a new table? Well, when you have a new set of data that's being tracked. So an example of this would be your employees have multiple time cards. Now, one thing to note here is that there is a direct connection between employees and time cards. You want to track multiple time cards on maybe a daily basis or monthly basis for those employees. Another example might be projects have multiple tasks. So there's a direct connection between those two tables. And then they have a shared set of users. This is within an existing use case, and you want to do granular reporting. That's when you want to create a new table. And there's a relationship between those tables. Great. So now that we know about tables and relationships, let's move on to fields. What are fields? Fields are essentially your elements of data, which are housed on your different forms and reports. And there can be different types of fields. So we know about field types like a text box field, multi-line text, formula fields, numeric fields, and so on. So they're elements of data. They can be different types of fields. And there can be dynamic form rules within fields, custom validation rules within fields. And you might want to create a new field when you are tracking those elements of data instead of a whole data set. So an example of this might be, you've got 4 to 5 project managers, and you just want to track which project manager is assigned to a specific project, as opposed to a whole different table housing their data. Awesome. So now that we know about fields, let's move on to roles and permissions. Now, roles and permissions are your users, who are people who are allowed to access your Quickbase application and collaborate over your data within your app. They can also be grouped, so you can create user groups. You can also enable single sign-on access. You can create custom permissions for those users, and you can assign a user-based dashboard through roles and permissions as well. So roles and permissions kind of speaks for itself. They provide custom access to users within an app for granular visibility. So an example of that might be, you might want to create a project manager role and a separate team member role within your project management or project tracking app. And that's because project managers might have an aggregate view of all your different projects and all the different tasks assigned to all team members. But team members might only want to see the tasks that are assigned to them. and nobody else. So that's an example of roles and permissions. Awesome. So now that we know what a realm is and what Quickbase Realms Anatomy looks like, and we learned about Quickbase's core concepts, we can apply this knowledge to use case discovery. So there's a couple of things that I want to cover here, but before I dive into use case discovery, I do want to call out, there is a really awesome session by Leanne Snook on app planning and discovery. Now, this is a more in-depth session on the entire app planning and discovery process, so I do highly recommend that you all watch that on demand. Great. So some of the things that I'm going to cover in use case discovery include a scenario. So I do have a project tracking scenario that we're going to go over. We're going to derive some discovery questions, and I'm going to talk about what kind of questions do I like to ask when I am doing a discovery for a new use case. And then we're going to talk about what kind of requirements can you derive out of that discovery session, and what are some of the artifacts that you can have, things like a process map, a data model, maybe some documentation which holds data for that use case. So let's dive into scenario. Now, I know there's a lot on the screen, so I'm going to read this out, just bear with me. So the scenario for project tracking is that currently all projects and related tasks are being tracked in multiple Excel files. These files are emailed back and forth between various project stakeholders, including project managers, team members, and requesters to provide updates on projects and its tasks. This process is very manual, time-consuming, and cumbersome to scale as more projects are being assigned to project managers. Yikes. Everyone has visibility into everything on Excel files, and that makes the data in the files more error-prone. There's no single source of truth platform to keep a track of and efficiently manage all projects and its related tasks and any documentation, while also allowing for custom visibility to different stakeholders involved. So in this scenario, we're looking for a more streamlined solution, and we're looking for it ASAP. So you could see that example of a spreadsheet on my slide. You could see how all the project names, the different tasks associated with those projects, everything is on one single spreadsheet. There's nothing that's broken down, and visibility is getting harder as more projects are being assigned to project managers. So let's talk about a few discovery questions that you might want to ask when a scenario or a use case is presented to you, or you learn more about something. So the three things that I like to identify or establish during my discovery session or sessions include identifying the workflow. So some questions you might ask around that are, describe the end-to-end process. Now, in our previous scenario, we read a lot about the pain points, the problems within their current project tracking process on Excel. But we don't really know what happens when a project is assigned to a project manager, who takes care of the tasks. What's the end-to-end task process look like, right? So you might want to ask, well, can you describe the end-to-end process, which will help you identify that workflow. Another thing I like to ask is the timeline or urgency of deployment. So how soon do you want it? We know from our previous scenario that they want this ASAP. But sometimes you might hear, well, I have some time. Maybe I need it next month, maybe in the next few months, maybe in the next few weeks. So you want to know that timeline or urgency as well to help you identify that workflow. Next thing I like to identify are roles and permissions. So who's involved in the process? From a scenario, we learned that there are project managers, there are team members, and there are requesters who will be requesting that project, along with some additional stakeholders. So we know who's involved in the process. And then what current tools are in place? So that's another question you might ask. So we know that currently Excel files are being used and they're being emailed back and forth. So there's some sort of a communication channel that's being used to move these spreadsheets from one user to another. The last thing I like to discover is gaps and requirements. So what are the gaps in the current process, and what are the requirements for the future state, the streamlined solution that you're looking for? So some questions I like to ask around that are, what's working and what's not working? And are there any specific requirements for your future state of this workflow? So from our previous scenario, we did learn that This is time consuming. It's cumbersome to scale as more projects are being assigned to project managers. So these are things that are not working, and there's no custom visibility. So these kind of become requirements as well. And moving on to the next slide, we'll read a little bit of requirements that might come out of this discovery. It's like, well, we want the ability to track projects by name, by requester, and description. Maybe we want to assign a project manager to those projects with start and end dates, a status update field. You might hear things like those projects then need to be broken down into multiple tasks like they were on our spreadsheet, but we need to see a full breakdown of that. And we want to track things like the task name, the start and end dates, maybe due dates, status updates. We want the ability to upload documents to tasks. You might hear things about notifications, so automating some of those tasks. Email reminders 7 days before team members' tasks are due. And something about roles and permissions, so visibility, custom visibility. Team members should be able to see a list of open tasks assigned to them only. And that turns into reports and charts as well. So what kind of reporting is required? So having gone through our scenario of project tracking and some of the discovery questions you might ask, you might land on requirements like these. It entirely depends on your use case and the complexity of that use case. And then the last thing that I want to talk about before we get into data modeling and app structure is process map. So that question, the discovery question to help us identify the workflow about what does your end-to-end process look like? That will help you create a swim lane diagram like this. Now, it doesn't have to look exactly like this, but it's good to know where does this project start and how does it end? So in this scenario, in this process map, you could see clearly defined user roles. So we know that there are team members, we know that there are project managers, and we know that there are requesters. And we also know that entire end-to-end workflow. So when a project gets created, it gets assigned to a project manager by a requester. Then that requester submits that project as a request. Quickbase sends an email notification to the project manager. Project manager takes that project, starts adding tasks to it, assigns team members to those tasks. That in turn triggers another email notification, and then task members do their thing to complete that task while project managers overlook those tasks until the entire project is completed. So an example, a very simple example of a workflow. Now, like I said, this can be more simple than this. This can be more complicated depending on your use case. All right, so I told you we were going to go really fast, so I hope everybody's still holding on to their pants because now we're going to get into data modeling and implementing it in app structure. I've got a diagramming tool that I like to use called Lucidchart. Now, you could use any diagramming tool that you like. Maybe you don't have this in place, but here's what I like to use. And a couple of things that you'll see here are some tabs on the bottom. So I've got my process map that's separate here that we saw as an example of one of our slides. After I've got my process map and my requirements, I've also talked to some of the stakeholders within my project. So project managers, team members, requesters, other stakeholders. I've also identified the business process, that end-to-end process, and some of the pain points that I'll be solving for. So now what I need to do is I need to hear keywords. What kind of data am I tracking within this application that's going to help me structure my application? And that's what I like to call data modeling. So some of the keywords that I heard in terms of tracking data included things like project managers. So there are going to be project managers. Be projects. So that's going to be another table. There are going to be tasks related to each project, multiple tasks. So that's going to be my third table. And my last table, if you recall from our scenario, there needs to be a way to upload documentation related to tasks. So multiple documents per task. So that's another table. So again, if you remember from our core Quickbase concepts, you want to create a new table anytime you are tracking a new data set in connection with another data set within your use case. So great. Now that we've got our full 4 tables in place, we can think about what kind of fields do we need to track, and that comes through our requirements. So we know that for project managers, we want to track the project manager name. We might also want to track something like department, and this list can go on. Next thing is, within our projects, we want to track, obviously, the PM. So I will write project manager here. That we're going to borrow from the project managers table. So there's going to be a one-to-many relationship between our project managers and projects. And we can even color code this to understand which fields we can borrow or look up from our parent table to our child table. So I'm going to color this blue. And this I'm going to color blue as well. Great. Next thing we want to track for our projects include the project name. And I can insert a row below. I want to track the status. I want to track the start date, end date, and maybe some notes, comments. Great. And I'm going to color the project name green. Awesome. So in our task table, we want to know the project manager. We want to know the project name. And other than that, we'll start tracking things like the task name, start date, maybe a due date for the tasks. We also want to know who this task is assigned to. So who the team member is that this task is assigned to. And we want to know the task status. And then here as well, I will add notes and comments. And then we can color code some of the things that we are borrowing from our parent table to our child table as well. So that's that direct relationship. And then this will be blue. We are borrowing the project name from the projects table, so we'll color that green. And then in our documents table, we might want to borrow things like the task name and maybe who's assigned to this task. So color coding is entirely up to you, but it helps me keep track of all of my lookup fields that I'm going to be taking into my child table. Great. Now for my documents, let's add project name, the task name, who this is assigned to, the doc name, so that's the document name. I might want to add things like the document type, the file attachment field. And at this point, you can enter a URL field as well. If you don't want to upload a physical file, you just want to give a link to an existing file somewhere else. And I'm going to add a description field in here as well. Great. So we've got that connected to our last table. And we can complete the color coding in here. Oops. Awesome. Great. So some of the keywords, just to recap, some of the keywords that we were looking for were what kind of tables do I want to create in my application? And the way to listen to them is what are some of the different data sets that I'm going to be tracking in my app? So we know that there are different projects. Each project has different tasks, and each task can have multiple documents associated with it. And it's up to you if you want to create the project managers table or not. I like to create it because I like to give a granular view in terms of reporting to see, okay, what are some of the costs? per project manager, what's all the time that's been spent on these different projects and so on. So you could do some really cool reporting with this kind of a view. So great, that is our data model. Now what we're going to do is we're going to take this data model and we're going to build an application in Quickbase. So here's Quickbase. I'm going to click on New App. And there are a couple of ways you could get started. If we had that spreadsheet that had the different projects and tasks, we could upload that spreadsheet into Quickbase, and Quickbase would create that app for us. But today, I want to use Visual Builder to create this app from scratch, kind of like we did on Lucidchart. So I'm going to click on Start from Scratch. All right, best practice to name your app first. I tend to forget that sometimes. Cool, so I'm going to name this app Empower Project Tracker. And we're going to do the same thing. So we're going to drag and drop some tables onto our canvas. We're going to populate them with fields and start connecting them together. So my first table was project managers. Next table is my projects. Then I've got my tasks. And last but not the least, documents. Great. Within my table, on the right-hand side, you'll see table properties. So you can assign a really cool icon to your tables to differentiate them. So for my project managers, if I scroll down on the left-hand side of my screen, I can find different types of fields. So I want a user field for my project managers. And then if I scroll up, I can find a text multiple choice, which will be a drop-down field for the different departments. So again, on field properties, you can click on Show More to add choices to that drop-down field. So this could be finance, it can be IT, it can be marketing, it can be PMO. Really, the choices are entirely up to you. Great. So I populated that first table. Next, for projects, I'm going to add a cool icon. I've got a text box field for the project name. Now notice how I'm not adding the project manager as a separate field in my projects. That's the beauty of relationships. So when I link these two tables together, Quickbase can automatically look up the field that I want to pull for project manager. So I'm just going to add my project name. I need start date. So we're going to do start date, another date to track end dates. I'm going to look for a multiple choice field to track status. And under show more, we can add choices like not started, in progress. This can be on hold. Maybe there's an issue that I want to track, and I want to see when this is complete. Great. So project name, start date, end date, status. And then we can add a multi-line field here for notes, comments. Perfect. That's our second table. And then for our tasks, let's give this a cool icon. We want the task name. Now remember, the project name can be pulled as a lookup field, so I don't have to add that here again. So I want the task name. I want the task status, and I'll do similar options to the ones that I added in the project. So not started, in progress, on hold, issue, and complete. Great. And then I'm going to add the date fields here. So let's get a start date. Let's add a due date. And then I want a user field in here for my team members who these projects can be assigned to. I mean, these tasks can be assigned to. So assigned to, great. And then I am going to add a multi-line field for notes, comments. Awesome. And our last table, documents. So we want the document name, document type. This is going to be a multiple choice. Now in here, you could do things like an agreement, a contract, or you could do straight up file types like PDF, Word, PowerPoint, photo, and so on and so forth. So entirely up to you, the different types of choices you want to add there. Next thing I'll do is I'll add a multi-line for description, and I will add a file attachment field and a URL field. Perfect. So we created our 4 tables, we populated them with fields, and we gave them cool icons to differentiate them from each other visually. Last step is to connect them. So we're going to drag and drop. So you can see, click to start a table-to-table relationship here. We're going to drag and drop from one table, this line, to another. And Quickbase pops up this box for us for this relationship, which is true. So it could be either or, but for our scenario, it's the first box where we know that there is a linear relationship between project managers and projects where each project manager can be assigned multiple projects. So I'm going to click on that and I'm going to hit create relationship. Now, if you are using Visual Builder for the first time, I do recommend reading the table-to-table relationship definition and some of the quick notes that Quickbase offers you there. Super useful. And great, I'll do the same thing between projects and tasks. So projects can have multiple tasks and tasks can have multiple documents. And there you have it. We're going to create this app. Wonderful. So now we've taken our data model, implemented our app structure, and we can start customizing this application. So starting from the dashboard, you could customize this page. So if I click on that, I'll have access to different widgets that I can populate on my dashboard. I can name my dashboard. I can create different types of dashboards for different types of end users, like a project manager dashboard versus a team member dashboard. I can drag and drop different widgets over here to allow my end users to search through different things in my app. So search through, say, projects and tasks. I can drag and drop different reports. So I can pick a report here. These are all auto provisioned for you once you create a new app. So say I want to list all of my projects, all projects, and I can hit save. Perfect. All right. So now that we've seen how you can take a data model and implement it into an app structure in Quickbase, I'd like to cover all the things that we learned today in our session. So we started off with understanding what a realm is and what it consists of. So we know that a realm is a logically segregated domain associated with an account. Then we learned about core Quickbase concepts. So we talked about apps, tables, relationships, fields, roles and permissions, and when to use those different concepts of Quickbase as opposed to another. Then we talked about the importance of use case discovery. Honestly, I cannot stress enough how important it is to do a proper discovery, whether that takes 1 hour, 2 hours, a whole day, a whole week, to fully and thoroughly understand the end-to-end process, the requirements, the process map, and then get to the data model that you're going to use to structure your Quickbase application. And then the last thing we did is we used all of that knowledge to construct a data model on Lucidchart. And we took that data model and we built an app through Visual Builder in Quickbase. So thank you all so much for attending my session. I hope that it was useful. I will open this up for questions, and I know a lot of you have been putting questions in our Q&A section, so I can't wait to answer those. And another request I have for you is if you can please click on that survey on our chat and please leave us some good feedback on our Slack channel, that'll be super useful for us. Thank you.